See you this morning and to hear you and to worship with you. And before we jump into the message this morning, I just wanted to remind you, several have asked me about our trip to Israel next year, Israel 2022, which we've just pushed forward a couple of years. And we had a group in 2019, and we were planning to go back in June 2022. And there'll be an informational meeting about that. If you have any questions, any interest, would like to know more about it, it'll be after the second service, about 12:30, 12:40, right here in the sanctuary. I invite you to be part of that. And then I need to tell you what's going to happen next week, because I'd kind of been outlining for you where we were going in the messages right up to Christmas. But, this is what happens when you're a preacher. And so I have some preacher friends that when we're together, the question always comes up, well, what are you preaching? And so on about 3 different occasions when I said, well, I'm preaching through the book of Daniel, they asked me, everyone, well, are you going to go past chapter 6? Because chapter 6 is the common jumping off point for most of us mere pastors. Because when you go to Daniel 7 and the rest of the book, it is prophecy, it is rich. The book of Revelation is really built on Daniel 7 through 12, and particularly Daniel 7. And I don't know if it was the Holy Spirit, if I was just feeling weak, if I was kind of wondering about my manhood. I don't know any of those things. They probably all were at play. But guess what? Next Sunday, we're in Daniel 7. That's right. And so you better be praying real hard. And if you haven't been to Daniel 7 and the rest of those chapters, well, just treat yourself to a nice read. And I imagine through that whole time you're reading Daniel 7, you're going to scratch your head and wonder just a little bit, well, I wonder what he's going to do with that. And so I encourage you to be here. And then we'll just take just to jump off into that prophecy. And my plan is then to head off to where the Lord has us right up through Christmas time. But so we're going to stay one more week at least in Daniel chapter 7. But today we're in Daniel chapter 6, part 2, because you were left with a little bit of a cliffhanger. Even had somebody asking me this morning, well, you left us with a cliffhanger with a sly grin because they knew how the story already ended. They thought they did anyway. Well, they did. And you know how this story ends too, because you've known it ever since you were a little child. If you've been around church, been in Sunday school, because Daniel 6, without question, is the most famous story in Daniel, and it's one of the most familiar, best-known stories in all of the Bible. It's Daniel in the lion's den. So to kind of set it right up for you again, let me remind you the theme of the book of Daniel, and that is that God is always in control. God is in charge, and God rules in spite of circumstances, in spite of appearances. The sovereignty of God always reigns supremely. God is always in control. Well, what that means for us is you can always trust Him. There's nothing that's out of God's control. Whatever is going on in your life this moment, you can rest assured, while you may not understand it and how it may become resolved, where it may take you, just know this: God is in control. Give everything and everyone to Him. You can trust Him always. Now, also a couple of themes that come through the book of Daniel, and this is sort of what we learn from Daniel. And we really learn from Daniel is if you want to make a difference, you have to be different. And always remember that. Daniel is really the one that gives us this great lived out example of that. If you want to make a difference with your life, you have to be different. And Daniel, as we've seen, has lived a life of difference. We also talked about how one of the great realities that we run smack dab into early on in life is that life is not fair. And if anyone ever wanted to complain about life not being fair, it could be Daniel. And we learned from Daniel then, how do you live your life when you don't get the life that you wanted? How do you live When life didn't turn out the way that you wanted, what you'd hoped for, you just thought, well, I thought it'd be different than this. I never expected this. I didn't want that. Daniel didn't get the life that he wanted, but Daniel lived the life that God wanted him to live. Are you? Am I? I may not have gotten the life I wanted. You may not have gotten the life you wanted, but are you living the life that God has given you? And then for the guys, we're reminded that few great men finish well. We see it all through history. We see it on the pages of the Scripture. We experience it in life. We personally struggle with it. Few great men finish well. And Daniel is the exception, and thus he becomes the example for us. So in Daniel chapter 6, sort of continue the story here, some of where we've been and some scenes from last episode. Daniel is an old man in Daniel chapter 6. We met him in Daniel 1 as a teenage boy, about 15, 16 years old. At least 70 plus years have passed. Daniel is probably 85, approaching 90 years old. There is a new king and kingdom. The Medes and the Persians have conquered the Babylonians. Now King Darius of the Medes and Persian empires on the throne. He's going to place Daniel in one of the supreme places of authority and rulership in his government over his kingdom. But Daniel, you might say, has political rivals. And they don't like the idea of someone being placed over them. They especially don't like the idea of Daniel being placed over them. So not only are they envious, but they are prejudiced. Race and religion come into play because Daniel, as they say, is one of those exiles from Judah. He's not even one of us. And they appeal to Darius's ego and just say, King Darius, wouldn't it be great if you just become God for a month? And Darius, you could pass a law that while we have all these myriads of other gods, that for 30 days no one can pray or worship any other god but you. And Darius thought that was a great idea. And he signed it into law, the law of the Medes and the Persians, and it stood. And so we read in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, it was more than a verbal command that leaves a little bit of wiggle room. It's signed. He went to his house where he had the windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem, as they always were. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks to his God, as he had always done, as he had previously done, as he had been doing as a holy habit for 70 years, praying to his God 3 times a day, regularly, publicly. Everyone knew it. It was his discipline. Let me just ask you, do you have any holy habits in your life? Do you have any spiritual disciplines that you faithfully follow day in and day out? Do other people know about your faith? And they know that there's something about you that's different because you're a follower of Jesus Christ and they see it. You know, Daniel decided a long time ago, 7 decades ago, he was going to serve God no matter the consequences. We read about it in Daniel 1, verse 8, as a teenage boy, where Daniel resolved, purposed in his heart, he would not defile himself by eating the food and drinking the wine off the king's table. And he would not make that violation against his commitment and understanding of who he was in relationship to his God. As a teenager, he made that decision. If you want to live to be an old person, faithful to God, you make a decision where you're a young person and live it out day in and day out to your God. And that's exactly what Daniel did. Daniel was steadfastly faithful. So faithfulness, we talk about it a lot. Let me just remind you what faithfulness. Faithfulness is doing what you ought to do even if it will cost you. I mean, this is the elements of integrity. This is character. This is consistency. Faithfulness is doing what you ought to do, even when it will cost you. It can be painful. It'll change your life. You'll lose something. But that's what Daniel is doing. So Daniel's accusers go to the king when they set up and realize Daniel did. And I think this transpired in the span of about less than 24 hours. I think that morning they went to Darius. He signed it into law. They staked out Daniel's room at noon and knew that Daniel prayed at noon and saw Daniel praying. So they brought the charges before nightfall to King Darius. Because then it was the custom then for executions to happen before sundown. And so Daniel's accusers go to the king. The king is distressed, but there's nothing he could do about it because it was the laws in the Medes and the Persians. But let me just show you 3 things that Daniel did not do. Daniel did not try to escape the consequences of his faithfulness and obedience to God. He didn't try to do anything different. He was faithful no matter if it was going to cost him. Daniel did not know what was going to happen. He didn't know what the outcome of his obedience and faithfulness to God was going to be, because he was going to be, as we would call it, he was going to be a good citizen up to the point he could not be a good Christian. And when they came into violation, we always choose God and Christ first. So he did not know what the outcome was going to be. And thirdly, Daniel did not bargain or try to make a deal with God. God, if you'll do this, I'll do that. No, Daniel just was faithful. And that's where we pick up the story in Daniel 6, verse 16. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared, now you kind of can imagine, can't you? They're getting ready to cast Daniel into this lion's den. The king is distressed, obviously. He realizes he had made a mistake. He had been duped. He's fond of Daniel. I think he loves Daniel, and Daniel is valuable to him. He knows this is not what he wants, but he's trapped. But he commands for Daniel to be brought and cast into the den of lions. Then the king declared to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually. Darius knew that Daniel always served God continually. May he deliver you. Darius is rooting for him. He's rooting for him. He recognizes real faith as an unbeliever. He recognizes real faith and respects it. You know what unbelievers really respect about Christians? Real faith. They do not respect casual hypocrisy, compromise in a Christian. They can do that. They see that themselves. They've got that. The king recognizes it, respects it. Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. And so we read in verse 17. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of the Lord's. No one was going to mess around and tamper with the lion's den. It was sealed with the seal of the Medes and the Persians and King Darius, that nothing may be changed concerning Daniel. Verse 18, then the king went to his palace, and he spent the night fasting. Meaning he didn't eat, he didn't want anything to eat. No diversions were brought to him. He didn't watch Netflix. He didn't, he didn't the harem. He didn't do things that kings would do to divert themselves, and sleep fled from him. And at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. I think he is in a fit of nervousness and anxiety, waiting for just the first little ray of sunshine. And so the scene leaves the lion's den. It goes to the king's bedroom, where this real struggle is taking place. Meanwhile, back at the lion's den, you're kind of wondering what would happen to Daniel. By the way, that little episode concerning Daniel being thrown into the lion den, the stone rolled over it, it's sealed, should start to sound vaguely familiar to those of us who are believers to another story we've heard from the New Testament in the Bible. So the camera cuts from the action at the lion's den to the restless night of the king in verse 20. As he rushed that morning, he came near to the den of lions where Daniel was. He cried out in a tone of anguish. This would be like a father crying out desperately, thinking a son or a child may be dead. He's crying out in this kind of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually." He doesn't serve God, he serves God continually, faithfully, no matter the consequences. Has he been able to deliver you from the lions? And then this is just sort of my imagination. There is this deafening silence, and there's suspense. And I think Daniel's got just a little wry grin on his face. Just said, I think I'll just wait a little while. Well, what about Daniel? Did Daniel survive the night? Was Daniel alive? But here's the point. We don't have to read any further in the story to get the point of the story. You know, does Daniel win? Well, Daniel had already won. Daniel won the moment he was thrown into the lion's den. It wasn't a matter of winning if he stayed alive or was eaten. Daniel won the moment he was cast into that lion's den, because Daniel was not concerned about whether or not the lions were going to tear him apart and eat him alive. Daniel cared nothing about that. Daniel cared supremely about being obedient and faithful to God in spite of the consequences. And being proven faithful was all that Daniel was concerned about. He's leaving the results of his obedience. His concern was being faithful and leaving all of the rest of it, the outcome, to God himself. That's Daniel. You know, there's a famous picture. You've probably seen it. This painting was painted by a British artist in 1890. The name of the painting is Daniel's Answer to the King. And if you just Google up paintings and pictures of Daniel in the lion's den, you'll find numerous examples of artists' imaginations of what it must have been like. But this particular one is one of the best known. And there's something quite interesting that the artist, I think, was trying to say in the painting. And if you look at the painting for a moment, noticing Daniel, the 7 lions behind him, you've probably seen it. You probably know what it is, don't you? Daniel has his back turned to the lions and his eyes upward towards heaven, not on the lions themselves. And it's a wonderful picture and image for all of us when we find ourselves in perilous situations that we don't know what the outcome would be. Well, just turn your back on the trouble, turn your eyes towards God, lift your head towards him, and face him. Daniel preferred death over denying his king and Lord God. And Daniel chose death. And that's what he preferred, because that's what Daniel wanted. So here's another lesson I'll just share with you here. Our responsibility is to obey God and leave all the consequences to him. So if you happen to be here this morning and you're just kind of caught in this terrible situation and you don't really know what to do, and you're afraid if you do what you know you should do and what God wants you to do and God is showing you to do, but you're concerned about what the consequences will be, let me just tell you, as I tell myself, be faithful, Be obedient to God. Don't compromise your character, your integrity, your faith, and leave all the consequences to God. He'll take care of it. What do you do when you're confronted with doing the right thing and it will cost you? You're not wondering if it's going to cost you. It will cost you. What do you do? Let me tell you what you do. You will do what is the most important thing to you. We all do. It just depends on what's the most important thing to you. That's what you're going to do. And somewhere before we're faced with that situation, we've got to decide before that, I will do the right thing no matter what the consequences are. And I'll leave the consequences to God. Let me tell you, Daniel had no guarantees. Daniel didn't go to the lions then thinking, well, my God's going to rescue me. Those lions, they're not going to bother me. I think Daniel went to the lions then just fully expecting before he hit the bottom of that pit, he'd be torn to pieces. You know, I've known a lot of people who've gone to churches that guarantee outcomes and tell them, if you just have enough faith, this good thing, this prosperous thing, they just guarantee you will get whatever you want if you only have enough faith. And that's a lie. And I know a lot of people who ended up thinking there's something wrong with my faith and have lost their faith because they didn't get that guaranteed outcome that some preacher in some false teaching church told them. Here's the truth. There are no guarantees. God is in charge. You trust Him. You leave the outcome to Him, knowing that God is a good God, and you trust Him no matter what. Well, Daniel verse 21 in chapter 6. Then Daniel said to the king, well, Daniel's alive. If you didn't know it, Daniel survived. Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever." And he will, either heaven or hell, but live forever. Everyone does. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouth of the lions' mouths, and they've not even harmed me. Daniel had a better night's rest. You know, it's almost like I could see him just curled up that night with a good book, rested up against a lion, kind of reading between the lions. That's just an old lame joke. I just had to use it. It was just lame. And, O king, God sent his angel, and I happen to think that's the same angel that was in the fiery furnace with the 3 Hebrew children, who was a pre-incarnate manifestation of Christ himself. Spent the night with him there. Because I was found blameless before him. And by the way, king, I'm also blameless before you because I've done you no harm. And the king was exceedingly glad. I mean, he's overjoyed, and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. And so Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no harm was found on him. Just like there wasn't even the smell of smoke on the 3 Hebrew children. Their eyebrows weren't even singed. I think the worst thing that happened to Daniel is a few lions licked him. No harm was found on him because he had trusted God. He trusted his God, and that's the real miracle of the story. It didn't matter what the consequences were. He trusted his God. C.H. Spurgeon once said, preaching from Daniel 6, the lions didn't eat Daniel because he was all backbone and gristle. He's just too tough. And at 90 years old, he wasn't about to give in now. It reminds me of a story from church history. The year is 155 AD. It's the 2nd century. So you have to realize now that the church isn't even 100 years old yet. But we're moving from first generation apostles, eyewitnesses of Jesus Christ, to the next generation. And the persecution of Christians was sweeping across the Roman Empire, which was that iron empire that had been prophesied, now was reigning over the world. And it had come and reached deep into Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, to a place called Smyrna. The Roman governor of Smyrna put out an order that the bishop or the pastor of Smyrna, by the name of Polycarp, was to be found, arrested, and brought to the public arena for persecution. Let me just add here. Polycarp was a disciple of the Apostle John. And so one of the original apostles, John, discipled Polycarp. John had been dead for about 55 years. But before John died, he wrote a letter. Well, he wrote 7 letters to a book. He wrote the Revelation, introduced by 7 letters to 7 churches of Asia Minor. One of those was the church at Smyrna. And he says in Revelation 2:10, to the church at Smyrna, to the angel of Smyrna, to the pastor of Smyrna. And among the other things he says there, be faithful unto death. Now, 55, 60 years later, the pastor of Smyrna is faced with being faithful to death. Well, they found Polycarp. They brought him before the thousands of people there in the Colosseum, the arena there at Smyrna, and they're screaming and shouting for blood. It was their main form of entertainment. The governor had a little bit of compassion, I think, when he just saw the old man, Polycarp, who was 86 years old. And he signaled for the crowd to be silent. And he said to Polycarp, curse Christ and live. And this hush came over the arena and the crowd, waiting for the old man to answer. And historians recorded in an amazingly strong voice, Polycarp said, 86 years I've served him, and he's done me no wrong. How dare I blaspheme the name of my King and Lord who saved me? Refusing to recant. Polycarp there in the center of the Colosseum, 3 times the proconsul, the governor of Smyrna, announced Polycarp has confessed himself to be a Christian. And the crowds roar. Polycarp has confessed himself to be a Christian. Kill him. Polycarp confesses himself to be a Christian for 3 times, and the crowd is chanting for the wild beasts, the lions, to be released to tear him apart. But the proconsul, the governor, opted for fire. And so his executioner seized the old man by his wrist and were getting ready to nail him to the stake that was there. And Polycarp stopped them, and he told them, he who gives me strength to endure the fire will enable me to do so without any help of your nails. And so he just stood there as the fire was lit. And he prayed one last prayer. I bless you because you have thought me worthy of this day and this hour to be numbered among the martyrs of your church and drink of the cup of your Christ. The fires soon and quickly engulfed Polycarp, but strangely enough, they just didn't consume him. It was sort of like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was right there before him. They may have been. And Polycarp was fireproof. And so, instead of the stench of burning flesh, it was also almost like the fragrance of frankincense was wafting through the Colosseum. Using a spear, the executioner stabbed Polycarp through the flames, and Polycarp bled out. Faithful even to the point of death. And the old man, Polycarp, died fearlessly and faithfully. And the way he died forever changed the eyewitnesses that lived. In my opinion, that is every bit great a miracle as Daniel 6. You leave the outcomes to God. Daniel lived and was delivered. Polycarp died but was delivered. Some of us are delivered from the flames. Some of us are delivered through the flames. The miracle is we are delivered. Well, here's the end of the story. The king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought, and they were cast into the den of lions. And here's the part we usually don't tell our kids and our grandkids. And they threw in their wives too. And they threw in their kids too. They threw their whole families in. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions, I think, were catching them in midair, ripping them apart and breaking their bones into pieces. This is in the Bible just to remind us, to let us know, and those critics that would say, well, they were toothless, harmless lions, weren't even hungry to start with. These were killer lions. They were hungry. They didn't eat Daniel, but judgment fell on Daniel's accusers. And I'll just add one little quick side note. It seems quite unfair that their wives and their kids would be thrown in. And I don't understand all of it, but I'll tell you this. It's a wake-up call for all of us who are men that our sins impact our wives and our kids more than we sometimes realize and think about. And sometimes they are innocent sufferers because of the decisions that we make as husbands and dads. So their whole families are under judgment. Then King Darius, in verse 25, wrote to all the peoples and nations and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. And then Darius says, I make a decree. And this is what kings love to do, don't they? They just love to make decrees. That in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. I don't know what happened. Somehow he got rid of that 30-day rule. Too much had happened and transpired. For the God of Daniel, He is the living God. He's enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and His dominion shall be there to the end. He delivers and He rescues. He works and reigns, and He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. What an impact that made on Darius. And then it just closes in verse 28. So this Daniel prospered until the end of the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And this is really the last we know of Daniel. Most likely dying there in Babylon, probably within the next few years, being 86 or so, or being in his 80s and 90s when this happened. Maybe doing a little writing, just spending his time out, no doubt being faithful, never returning back to Jerusalem, just going from Babylon to the New Jerusalem, his home forever. And he prospered, just being faithful. So let me give you 5 quick lessons. They don't even need much commentary, and I'll try not to give them much commentary today. But here's lesson number 1. It is possible to live for God in a very godless world. So we just need to remind ourselves as Christians in the church, quit making excuses. We know this is an evil place to live in this world. We've never been told it would be anything less than that. And so I know that you work in a place that's filled with the spirit of Babylon. You go to school where you can't even pray publicly or mention the name of God. I know that. We live in a place that is difficult to live out our faith. It is possible to live for God That is really what Daniel's story is all about. Just obey God and leave the consequences to Him. Number 2, when you live for God, you should expect opposition. You should expect persecution. I just reminded of this verse, and I don't know why I forget this verse, but in 1 Peter 4:12, Peter just says, do not be surprised at the fiery trials when they come upon you. You know what happens when I've experienced a fiery trial? I'm surprised. I'm like, what? You know, I'm not even your average Christian. I'm a paid Christian. I mean, I'm a professional. How can this be happening to me? Do not be surprised as if something strange were happening to you. This is not strange. The strange thing is, if you're not experiencing any kind of opposition, persecution, problems because of your faith, that's strange. And all it really says is, I just won't judge, but there's really not anything different about you. So you're not making a difference. Nobody really cares because you're irrelevant when it comes to the cause of Christ and the things of eternity. Number 3, God can use you to impact the most unlikely people when you are faithful to Him. This is the impact, this is the effect of the life of Daniel, faithful to the end. You look at the impact that he had on Nebuchadnezzar, the impact that he had on Darius. You never know who's watching you or what they're looking for. But they may just be looking for something that you have that they don't have, and they want what you've got. And so this is why we're always consistent, because we have eyes on us all the time. It's a powerful witness, faithfully living it out. Number 4, God is able to deliver you from any danger you face. He is a God who delivers. But that's balanced with number 5. God always delivers in His own time and His own way. And we don't get to tell God how we want to be delivered. He delivers us, able to deliver us, but in His own time and in His own way. Daniel is delivered from the pit. Polycarp is burned at the stake. They are both delivered. Some from, some through, but God always delivers. And so here's my prayer. In the book of Daniel, and especially Daniel 6, you have this wonderful picture of the gospel. And probably you were starting to make some connections, because Daniel serves really as a foreshadowing of the one who would come, and the one that would be faithful, accused falsely, nailed to a cross, thrown to a pit, have a stone rolled over it, sealed with the signet of the king, but arise victoriously on the third day. It's the same God that Daniel served, the same God that we served. He sent His rescuer to come for us, and His name is Jesus Christ. And so let me just ask you, do you know Him? And are you living for Him? And so that's my prayer for you today. Let's pray. Father, I pray that we'll be different. But the way that we'll be different is through knowing Jesus Christ, who changes our life. It's only by that difference can we make any difference in this world. And Father, I pray for those today who may be going through a fiery trial. They're in the midst of a lion's den. Father, they're struggling. Father, they don't know which way to go. I pray they'll just hold on to You and simply say, God, I don't know what the consequences of this, but I'll be faithful. I'll be obedient. I'll leave the outcome to You, but I trust You completely. May that be our prayer today. May we follow You into this world that desperately needs to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And it's in His name we pray. Amen.